Let's take a look at a situation where we have a computer, and this is what we're going to call the client computer, and across the internet this computer is connected to a server computer. Okay, let's for example consider the case of Facebook, right? All data related to the Facebook is stored on the Facebook server, right? Okay, and here you are at your computer and you can open a web browser and request data from Facebook, and Facebook is going to, I should say it's going to respond to your request by sending the data back. Okay, this example is a typical example of a client server application. You are able to use Facebook by using a client computer, and there is a server computer on the internet. So it is with the help of these two that you are able to use Facebook. So this is a typical example of a client server application. Alright, moving on, we want to understand the role of scripts. And you can think of a script as a small piece of code that gets executed on a computer system, right? Now there are, as we've already discussed, there are two sides. There is the client side and there is the server side. The script that runs on the client side, or the piece of code that runs on the client side, is called the client side script. The piece of code that runs on the server side is called the server side script. Now, as far as the client side script is concerned, JavaScript is a programming language that is used to do scripting on the client side, that is used to write small pieces of code that are going to run in the web browser. Because the web browser is running on the client side, web browsers are able to process pieces of code that have been written in JavaScript. Okay, let's take a look at this side. On this side, the popular language that is used to write pieces of code, small pieces of code or scripts of code, right, that popular language is called PHP. Okay, so PHP is the script that runs on the server side. So in short, JavaScript is the programming language that is used to write scripts that run on the client side, and PHP is the programming language that is used to write scripts that run on the server side. Let's now take a look at the client side scripting. Okay, now one thing you should note is that this is an HTML file, alright, because it starts with the HTML tag and it ends with the HTML tag. So it is the HTML file that is going to be opened up using a web browser. So the web browser is going to be working with this file. Okay, now how do we know that this file contains a piece of JavaScript code? Well, we look for the script tag. The script tag is used to indicate the start of the JavaScript code, and this closing tag /script tag indicates the end of the JavaScript code, meaning all of this code that you see here has been written in JavaScript. And the whole idea is that your web browser should be able to process this code, alright, that has been written in JavaScript. And how is the web browser able to understand this? The web browser has an interpreter. Remember, we've studied interpreters, compilers and assemblers. You know, these are different forms of translators. JavaScript is a high level language. So basically what your web browser does is it has an interpreter, right, and that interpreter is going to understand, read and process and execute this line of code, right? And then it's going to go to the next line, read it, process it, execute it, going to go to the next line, read it, process it and execute it. So we have an interpreter with the web browser that is going to process this piece of code. Okay, let's see if we can make sense out of this piece of code and see if we can understand what this piece of code is saying. Okay, so when we take a look at the first line, we can instantly see that this is an assignment statement. There's an equals to sign here, which means that the right hand side, this side, will basically return us some sort of a value. And we can also see that there is a message here, because the message has been written in quotes, right? So this is the message, right? And this is an assignment statement. This is an assignment statement. Okay, and on the left hand side we can see this is VAR, which probably stands for the word variable. So there is a variable called temp-c, which is receiving a value from the right hand side. We can easily see that there's something happening on the right hand side. The user is being shown a message and he's being asked to enter a Celsius value, meaning some sort of a temperature in Celsius, right? And whatever value the user enters is going to be assigned to this variable temp-c. Okay, now moving on to the second line, we can see that this line, this is also an assignment statement, but this time on the right hand side we are not taking an input from the user. Rather we are calculating the value using an expression, right? So this also is an assignment statement. This also is an assignment statement in which the value being calculated on the right hand side is being saved in the variable called tempf. And most likely what's happening is that the temperature that was entered in Celsius degree C earlier on in degree C is now being converted into Fahrenheit. Moving on, let's take a look at the third statement and let's see what the third statement is all about. And we can see that it says it's an alert and there is a message that's being shown to the user which says the Fahrenheit or the Fahrenheit value is, and then there's a plus sign, meaning that this message is going to be shown as well as the value inside this variable is going to be shown. So this is most likely an output statement, right? This is an output statement. This was where an input was being taken by the user and the value was being assigned to temperature C, right? And this was also an assignment statement. So even though this was an assignment statement, on the right hand side, on this side, we were basically taking input from the user. This is also an assignment statement. The second statement is also an assignment statement, but this time we were not taking any input from the user. Rather we were calculating the expression on the right hand side and that value was assigned to this variable tempf. And finally this third statement is an output statement. Okay, that is all you are expected to know. You should be able to take a look at the piece of code and make judgment on what the code is doing. You are not supposed to know the JavaScript programming language as such, but the program code itself is going to give you hints about what the code is doing. And now we are going to take a look at the server side script, and instantly we can see that this file has these tags which indicate there is a PHP script here, right? So the PHP script is enclosed between these two tags, right? So this is where the PHP script can be, those lines of code that have been written in PHP can be added here, right, between this tag and this tag. Okay, now let's take a look at the piece of code and see if it makes sense. Alright, what we see here is that there's something called temp C, which most likely is a variable, right? And there's this dollar sign. The dollar sign, you should remember, is used before a variable name. Okay, so this is used before a variable name. Anytime you write down a variable name, you have to use it. Okay, but this is not the only place where you use a dollar sign. What I'm saying is that whenever you're going to use a variable name, you're going to include a dollar sign. So that's what he has done here. There is a dollar sign here, and then there's the name of the variable called temp C. And what we see here is on the right hand side, we also see a dollar sign. But what you should notice here is that all the words have been written in capital. This indicates that this is a method. This is a method or a procedure or a function, whatever you want to call it. This is a method, right? Okay, so how do you differentiate between a method and a variable? A variable is always going to start with a lowercase letter. So if you have something like $myfile, then myfile is the name of the variable, and the dollar sign is used before dollar sign is used with every variable name at the start, right? And something like this, if you see $post, everything is in capital letters, meaning what? Meaning this is a method or a function or a procedure, however you want to call it. But this is, so the capital, if everything is written in capital, that means it's a method, right? But if followed by a dollar sign, if something is starting with a small letter like temp C or temp F, then because it's starting with a lowercase letter, that means that this is a variable. Alright, let's now try and understand the context and see how this code is going to get executed on the server side. Let's assume that this file is called the index.php file. See, any file that has PHP code inside of it has a PHP extension. Even though you see some tags here, right? These are HTML tags. But since in this case there is a PHP code that is part of this file, therefore we name it as therefore we add the extension .php to this file. Okay, so that's just the rule. Okay, so this index.php file, let's see how this gets executed. Let's just try and understand the situation. So let me just draw real quick. Let's say this is the client computer. Across the internet, this is the server computer, right? On the server computer, we have this file index.php, right? That's where our file is stored. Okay, and this is the client computer. Okay, so this is the client computer, and let's assume that inside of this client computer we have a web browser, right? So we have a web browser that is running inside of this client computer. And let me just draw the web browser. Let's say this is the web page that's open inside the web browser, right? So this is the web page that's open inside the web browser. Inside of this web page we have a simple form, it's just asking, there's a single field, right? There's a single field and there's a form here which says temperature in Celsius. So this is where the user is going to enter the temperature value, and then the user is going to press this submit button. When the user presses the submit button, this computer, which is the client computer, is going to send a request across the internet to this server computer, and it is going to send a request for the file called index.php. So this, when you press this submit button, we're going to place a call to the web server for this file index.php, which is lying here. one thing that we want is that the user, when he enters a value here, for example the user enters 14 degrees, right, as the temperature in Celsius. So if he enters this value, we want this value to be sent along with the request to the server, right? So we are requesting this file from the server, right? But we also want to send this value 14 along with the request. Now remember, all web page transfer takes place with the help of HTTP protocol. Now HTTP protocol has a method called the get method. It has a method, it is, and this is, we don't want to get into the details of this, but just so you understand, HTTP uses the get method to send any values from the form all the way across to the server. So this is a method that is used by HTTP, the protocol, to send this value 14 across the internet to the server. And remember, we are requesting this file. When we are requesting this file, we are also sending this value 14. Now one final thing you should know is that this value 14 that the user just typed, for example, let's assume, gets saved into a variable called value. Okay, so this is the name of the variable value, and when the user types in a value, any value, that value gets saved in this variable value. When we press the submit button, the URL looks like this. It could look something like www.abc.com/index.php, right? And as you can see here, in the URL, the value being sent and the variable that holds that value are also mentioned. So this is what's happening. This was our computer, right? This was the internet, and this was the server. Let's say this server belonged to abc.com, right? www.abc.com, and on this server was a file called index.php, right? So we are sending a request to this server for this file, and we are also passing the value that the user entered, and that value that the user entered was held in the variable called, the name of the variable coincidentally was also value, right? So it could be any name, the variable could take any name, but in this case it has the name value. So when this request is received by the server sees that the file being requested is index.php, and that there is some data that has been sent, right? That data is part of the URL, right? And the variable that's holding the value, the variable that's holding the data is called value, right? So when the server takes a look at the index.php script, right, index.php file, sorry, when the server takes a look at the index.php file, it sees that there is a PHP script inside. There is a PHP script inside the file, and the server knows that this script has to be executed by the server, right? So the server has to process the PHP script, and look at what this script is doing. Okay, this is a variable, right? We can see it's small, it's beginning with a lowercase letter, and on the right hand side we can see that everything is capital. $get is all capital, and in the bracket we can see there's this word value written here, which is what? Which is the name of the variable that was passed to us, right? This was the variable that was passed to us in the URL. So effectively what is happening here is, if we want to try and understand this, that this get method which is part of PHP. This is not the get method that was part of HTTP, rather this is the get method that is part of PHP. This get method is going to take the value that is inside this variable, which is 14, and assign this variable temp C this value of 14. Okay, in the next line we can see that this variable temp F is receiving a value from this expression. This expression once again is doing what? This expression is calculating the temperature in Fahrenheit. So the value is calculated in Fahrenheit, and that value is copied into this variable temp F. Finally, this word echo is meant for output, right? So this is the output that is going to be, so this is the output statement, and there is a message in the output statement which says the Fahrenheit value is, and then there is another output statement which says temp F, right? Remember, temp F is holding the value that was calculated in Fahrenheit. So effectively what's going to happen is that this file, which is the index.php file, and this is on the server side, this processing was done on the server side. The result of this processing, which is basically, you know, these echo statements and this file, is going to get transferred back to the client computer, right? This is going to get transferred back to the client computer with the executed script, right? This script was executed and the executed result is going to be sent back, right? So what's going to happen is, on your web browser, you'll see a message which says, when this file is returned, and this file index.php is opened by the web browser, it will show something like this: the Fahrenheit value, okay, I have very small space to write here, the Fahrenheit value is, and then, you know, the value of this temp F variable, let's say this was 47 degrees, right? 47 degrees, right? So this is what's going to get shown. Remember, in this case what happened? The request was sent from the client to the server computer, right? To the server computer. On the server computer, the PHP script was executed because the index.php file had a PHP script. The PHP script was executed on the server side, the calculation was done, and these echo statements were used to output the result, and finally the result was sent back to the web browser. Well, in fact, this file was sent back, index.php was sent back, and that file included these echo statements also. Okay, I hope you've understood how client side and server side scripting works. In server side scripting, all the processing takes place on the server side. As far as client side scripting is concerned, all the processing takes place on the client side. So if you want the user's computer to do processing, you have to do client side scripting, and if you want the server computer to do the processing, then you have to do some server side scripting. Okay, let me give you a quick example of what else can be done with client side scripting and server side scripting. Just consider this simple example. You are using your web browser and you have opened this web page for gmail.com, right? So you want to log into gmail.com. So this web page is open in your web browser, and this is the internet, right? So you are supposed to type in your username. When you type in your username and you do something like a #12, immediately an error is thrown. You know, hash is an invalid character. Okay, hash is, so on your very computer, hash is an invalid character, right? Hash is an invalid character. Remember, this is not allowed in username. So what's going to happen? The validation check was immediately applied on the client side using JavaScript. So there was some JavaScript code that was running in the background, which did what? Which looked up for this character, and once it found this character, it said, this is an invalid character, this is not allowed. Which means on the client side we can use JavaScript to do some validation checks, right? To do some validation checks. For example, if you were trying to press the submit button here, right, or the login button or whatever it is called, it would throw an error immediately because the password field has been left empty. So the presence check, which is a validation check, presence check would be applied by some JavaScript code that is running on this side, right? Okay. Finally, when you entered username and password, and this information was transferred across the internet to gmail.com, at this end gmail.com is going to try and see if your username that you just provided and the password, is that a correct combination. Now this can be done with the help of PHP script. Now the PHP script is going to take the username and password that has just been sent, right, to this server computer, and it's going to pass this username and password to some sort of a database here. So there's a database here, so that this username password combination can be looked up, right? So this PHP script will collect these username and passwords that are coming through the internet, and it will pass these on to the database, and the database is going to check if this combination, if this record exists, and if this is the correct combination or not. So this username password combination needs to be verified. So the job of the PHP script at this end is to talk with the database, right, to communicate with the database, and when the database is going to return a result, the PHP script is going to collect that result and send it back here to the user, telling the user basically that you supplied an incorrect username password, or whether you have successfully logged in. So that kind of a message is going to be sent back. Alright, so all the processing on this end, on the server end, is done using PHP. Hopefully you've understood the concept.